Listen closely. That sound. It's the heavy rusted thud of a gate closing on a decade of freedom. If you drove past the Miller Ranch in Wyoming this morning, you'd see something that defies every law of the wilderness. Standing behind iron bars, not broken, not bloodied, but eerily still, is the black stallion they call Outlaw. For 10 years, this horse was a ghost, a 1,200-pound shadow that no rope could catch and no fence could hold. He's the king who led his herd through blizzards that killed men. He's the rebel who stared down helicopters and laughed at the best wranglers in the West. But today, Outlaw isn't fighting. He isn't screaming. He's just watching the horizon. The locals are whispering that he finally lost his edge. They think the world finally broke him. They're dead wrong. Outlaw didn't get caught. He didn't lose. He walked into that cage on his own terms. He traded his sky, his mountains, and his very soul for one thing only. Today, I'm going to tell you why the most dangerous horse in America chose a prison over a kingdom. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll realize that sometimes putting on the chains is the most heroic thing a leader can ever do. You don't get a name like Outlaw by being a pet. You earn it in the dirt, the wind, and the blood of the range. He was the vanguard, the shield. For a decade, Outlaw ruled the high plains with a simple code: family first, humans never. I remember back in 2019, some high-stakes buyers came up from Texas with drones and specialized capture teams. They cornered him at the Devil's Notch, a 20-foot drop with nowhere to run. They thought they had him. They already had the tranquilizer needles ready. But Outlaw didn't flinch. He let out a scream that sounded like a freight train hitting a wall of glass, and then he did the unthinkable. He didn't jump for his life. He signaled his herd to scatter into a hidden ravine while he all by himself charged the lead truck. He smashed the radiator with a single kick and vanished into the dust before they could even reload. That was him. Unbreakable, untouchable, a symbol of everything we love about the American West, the part of us that refuses to be fenced in. He hated the smell of man. To him, a fence was a declaration of war. He lived for the freedom to run until his lungs burned and the stars came out. But freedom is a luxury you can't afford when your family is about to be erased from the map. It started with a smell, not the sweet scent of rain, but the acrid, choking stench of ash. The Great Basin Fire of 2024 wasn't just a wildfire. It was a wall of death, 3 stories high, moving faster than a gallop. And as the king of the plains looked back at his tired mares and his trembling foals, he realized his speed wasn't enough this time. To save them, he'd have to do the one thing he swore he'd never do. He'd have to find a master. It started with a silence that felt like a punch to the gut. The birds stopped. The coyotes went ghost. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Outlaw stood on the jagged edge of Devil's Notch, his nostrils flared, tasting the air. But this time, it wasn't the scent of sweet rain or sagebrush. It was the smell of the end. Within minutes, the Wyoming horizon didn't just change, it bled. The sky turned a bruised, angry purple, torn open by pillars of fire 10 stories high. This wasn't a wildfire you could outrun. It was an inferno. It didn't crawl, it lunged. It swallowed the timber with the roar of 1,000 freight trains screaming down a mountain. The herd panicked. Mares shrieked, circling their foes as the heat began to singe their manes. To them, the world was ending. Every instinct in a Mustang says one thing: run. Run until your lungs burst. Run where the smell of man and wire can't reach you. But there was nowhere left to run. The fire had boxed them in on 3 sides. Behind them was a sheer drop-off. In front, a sea of liquid fire. Outlaw stood at the center of the chaos. The smoke so thick it felt like swallowing glass. He looked toward the only opening left, a narrow trail leading down into the valley, straight toward the Miller Ranch. It was a fortress of green grass and high-pressure sprinklers, a place of iron and men, a place Outlaw had spent his entire life despising. Think about that choice for a second. You're the freest soul on God's green earth. You fought every rope, every fence, every man who tried to own you. If Outlaw had gone alone, he could have made it. He was fast enough to outrun death. He could have kept his crown and his mountains. But if he left, his family would burn. The foes wouldn't last 5 minutes. The old mares would choke on the ash before they ever saw the sun rise. For the first time in a decade, the king of the plains didn't look at the horizon for an escape. He looked down at the trembling life behind him. A tiny foal, barely 3 months old, tucked her head into his flank, her eyes wide with a terror no animal should know. In that moment, Outlaw made a decision that no rope could ever force a horse to make. He let out a scream that echoed over the roar of the flames, a command that shook the very earth. He didn't lead them deeper into the wild. He led them straight toward the lights of man. Near midnight, old Elias Miller heard the thunder, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was the sound of 100 hooves pounding the sun-baked earth. He ran to his porch, rifle in hand, expecting thieves or predators, but when he clicked on his floodlights, the air left his lungs. There, at the main iron gate, stood the outlaw. His black coat was matted with ash. His eyes were bloodshot from the heat. He stood like a wall between the fire and his exhausted herd. He didn't flinch at the lights. He didn't kick. He just looked Elias dead in the eye, the same man who had tried to trap him for 10 years. There was no begging in that stare. It was an ultimatum. It said, "I am surrendering myself. In exchange, you open this gate for them." Elias, a man as hard as the Wyoming rock, felt his hand shake. He understood. He set his rifle down and walked toward that gate, the metal hot to the touch from the approaching fire. As the iron groaned open, Outlaw stood his ground, watching every single mare and foal pass into the safety of the green pastures. Only when the last foal was through did Outlaw finally, slowly, step inside. The clang of the gate locking behind him sounded like a funeral bell for his freedom. The king of Wyoming had officially entered his cage. Not because he was beaten, but because he had conquered himself. He chose the bars to save the blood. And that, my friends, is where a legend truly begins. The morning after the fire, the world felt hollow. The sky was a pale, sickly gray, and the smell of wet ash hung over the Miller Ranch like a shroud. The danger was gone, but for Outlaw, a new kind of battle had just begun. For the first time in his life, he didn't wake up to the smell of damp earth and the sight of an infinite horizon. He woke up to the sound of a heavy latch sliding into place. He woke up to the smell of hay and the 4 wooden walls of a stallion pen. Most horses, once caught, will thrash. They'll kick the boards until their hooves bleed, or they'll sink into a hollow-eyed depression. But Outlaw? He just stood in the center of that pen, his head held high, his eyes fixed on the distant, blackened peaks of the mountains. He wasn't a broken animal. He was a prisoner of war. He had traded his sky for the lives of his herd, and he was paying the debt in silence. Word spread through the valley faster than the fire did. Elias Miller caught the black stallion. The news brought people from 3 counties away. They lined up along the fence like they were at a circus, pointing and whispering. "Look at him," one man said, leaning against his truck. "Doesn't look so tough behind a fence, does he? Bet he'll be under a saddle by the end of the month," another chuckled, spitting tobacco into the dirt. They saw a trophy. They saw a conquest. They saw the outlaw finally brought to heel by a cage. They didn't see the scars on his chest, from where he'd pushed his mares through the burning brush. They didn't see the way he looked at the foals grazing safely in the green pasture nearby, making sure the deal he'd made was still being honored. And they certainly didn't see the man standing on the porch, watching them with a growing anger in his gut. Elias Miller didn't join the crowd. He waited until the sun went down and the trucks had all rattled away. He walked out to the pen, carrying nothing but a bucket of water and a heavy conscience. He stood 10 feet back. He didn't try to shush or gentle the horse. He didn't offer a sugar cube like he was dealing with some backyard pony. Elias was an old soldier, a man who knew what it felt like to survive a war while leaving his brothers behind. He looked at Outlaw, and for the first time he saw the truth. He saw that the gate hadn't captured this horse, the horse had captured the gate. "They think I caught you, don't they?" Elias whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. Outlaw turned his head. He didn't flinch. He didn't move away. He met Elias's gaze with a terrifying clarity. In that moment, there was no man and no beast. There were just 2 old souls who understood the weight of responsibility. "You did it for them," Elias said, nodding toward the herd in the dark. "And I'll be damned if I let them turn your sacrifice into a show." That night, Elias didn't go back to his bed. He grabbed a bedroll and slept right there, on the dirt outside the pen. He wasn't guarding a prisoner. He was standing watch for a king. The battle wasn't about breaking Outlaw anymore. It was about whether a human was worthy of a horse's trust. And as the moon climbed over the charred ridges, the iron bars didn't seem quite so heavy because for the first time, Outlaw wasn't standing in that cage alone. Weeks turned into months. The scorched earth of Wyoming began to heal, covered by a stubborn blanket of new green grass. The fire was now a ghost story told in town, but for Outlaw, the cage remained a cold, hard reality. Elias Miller never once tried to break him. He never carried a whip, and he never brought a saddle near that pen. He treated Outlaw with the silent reverence one might show a fallen king. But Elias wasn't blind. He saw the way Outlaw's coat, once as bright as black glass, was turning dull. He saw how the stallion would stand for hours, motionless, staring at the purple ridges of the horizon where the world didn't have corners. Outlaw was fading, not from a lack of oats, but from a lack of purpose. Then came the silver truck. A man stepped out, wearing boots that cost more than Elias's tractor and sunglasses that hid his eyes. He was a collector of fine things. He didn't see a hero. He saw a trophy. He laid a check on the fence post, a number, with enough zeros to fix every problem Elias Miller ever had. "I'll take him to Kentucky," the man said, his voice smooth and empty. "He'll be the star of my stable. My trainers will have him under a saddle in a week. A horse like that belongs on a stage." Elias looked at the check. Then he looked at Outlaw. The stallion didn't even acknowledge the stranger. He was looking past the trucks, past the ranch, toward the clouds. In that moment, Elias realized something that made his blood run cold. If he kept Outlaw to protect him, he was no better than the fire. He was just another wall. He realized that the greatest act of love isn't holding on, it's having the courage to let go of what you fought so hard to save. Elias didn't touch the check. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the shed, grabbed a simple lead rope and whispered to the stranger, "Get off my land. Some things in this world aren't for sale." Elias led Outlaw to the far edge of the north pasture, where the ranch wires ended and the great wild began. The herd Outlaw's family was waiting there. They had sensed it. The mares stood like statues, and the foal, Little Star, let out a soft nicker of recognition. Elias reached up. For the first time, he let his hand rest on the stallion's forehead. He felt the heat of the animal, the pulse of a heart that beat for the mountains. "You did your job, Outlaw," Elias whispered, his voice thick with a decade of dust and a lifetime of respect. "You paid the debt. Your family is safe. Now, it's time you went home." With a steady hand, Elias unlatched the heavy iron bolt. He swung the gate wide. The silence that followed was deafening. Outlaw took one step, then another. He stood on the edge of the line between the world of men and the world of the wind. He turned his massive head and looked back at Elias. It wasn't a look of fear. It was a long, piercing gaze that said, "I see you, man, and I will never forget." Then, Outlaw turned toward the peaks. He didn't gallop at first. He walked with the slow, heavy grace of a king returning to his throne. He reached the crest of the first hill, silhouetted against a sunset that looked like liquid gold. He let out a scream, a wild, earth-shaking roar that echoed off the canyon walls, announcing to the world that the outlaw was back. And then, like a black shadow merging with the night, he and his herd vanished into the horizon. They say if you're quiet enough on a Wyoming night, you can still hear the thunder of those hooves. Elias Miller died a few years later, a poor man by the bank's standards, but the richest man in the valley by any measure of the soul. He proved that you don't own a spirit like outlaws. You just get the privilege of walking beside it for a while. So, I have to ask you, as you sit there today, what is the cage you've chosen for yourself? Maybe it's a job you hate, a fear you can't face, or a life lived for the expectations of people who don't know your heart. We all have our cages. But Outlaw taught us that the bars only have as much power as we give them. True freedom isn't about having no responsibilities. It's about having the strength to stay when you're needed and the wisdom to run when you're free. Because in the end, we aren't defined by the fences that hold us in. We are defined by the sacrifices we make to keep the ones we love out under the open sky. Have you ever looked into a horse's eyes and seen the person you were always meant to be? Maybe today is the day you finally open the gate.